All right, yo. So we talk notes. I'm going to move on from this slide. So, my people, today we are going to be talking about what's going on in education. I know you all know Wendy really well. I don't think I'm entirely content with the introduction I gave you of me last time. It was a little rushed. I had gotten there a little late and whatnot. So to give you some background on why this topic is near and dear to me, I'm a high school teacher for about 10 years. I teach English. I grew up between two communities. One of them was Newark, and one of them was West New York. My father lives in Newark, always has, and my mother's here in West New York, where I currently teach. I teach writing at Montclair State as well, part-time, and I'm getting my doctorate in family science and human development, where I study things like relationships and the impact they have on adolescent development and whatnot. So I hope that gives you an idea of why what we're talking about today is so important to me and why I think we need to know about it so much. We're going to focus on five trends, meaning personalized and alternative learning models from just traditional schooling, social and emotional learning, trauma-informed practices, school choice and charter schools, testing and accountability, and technology and artificial intelligence, right? And we're going to focus on eight challenges as well. I don't know if we're going to be able to get through the whole presentation today, but whatever we don't get through today, we will move into the next time as well. So the challenges I want to focus on are also AI and technology, because whereas there are many benefits, it has also brought challenges with it, right? Teacher shortage and burnout, post-COVID recovery, and I mean that in terms of learning loss, absenteeism, etc., equity and opportunity gaps, mental health and well-being, absenteeism and disengagement, funding, and Trump's presidency and how it looks so different now from what it was 4 years ago, okay? Or even a year ago, right? So any questions about the agenda or any questions about me before I go ahead and move forward? Okay. So to start off, let's talk about the different types of classroom settings and the different types of school settings there are. There are our comprehensive public schools, like the one I work in. So these take all students, whether multilingual learner, special needs, anybody, just generally. So in your community, we could think about East Side High, we could think about Weequahic, we could think about Malcolm X Shabazz High School. So just a typical high school is what you could think of there. Some folks choose to homeschool. That is a parent or a guardian's option to pull their kid out of school and generally and just educate them from home. So there are homeschooling communities, there are groups and online platforms for them, and there are associations that provide resources for these folks. And there are a such thing as project-based schools. Many of them are private schools, but they focus on critical thinking and projects throughout. There is no exams. It is very non-traditional. A teacher there may focus solely as a facilitator and not so much as somebody that gives direct instruction or anything like that.
Just to add one point there. So if you're, for example, learning about climate change, which I know Mr. Barrett loves to learn about, rather than learning about it through a book, you would go to the swamps and look at how climate change has impacted the meadowlands in the last 15 years. That's like that type of school.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy, for that example. Before I move on to the next slide, I want to ask a question. What kind of a school do you guys go to? Anybody know? What kind of a school do you guys go to?
Good question, Juan.
Anybody know? Anybody want to give it a shot? No problem if you don't know. Again, there is no judgment here today. And also, feel free to stop me if anybody has a question at any point.
Look, Michelle answered
Let me
correctly.
see. A magnet school, yes, perfect, right? So there are magnet schools and also charter schools. So I want to talk about them a little bit, then I want to give you a very clear distinction on the difference of them, okay? So magnet schools are public schools, essentially. There is a selection process, and there usually is some kind of a special curriculum. Like you guys go to data science, so I'm assuming your curriculum looks more STEM focused. When I did my student teaching, I did it at University High School of the Humanities, right there on Clinton Place. That was of the humanities, and there was that focus there too. So it's meant to attract students that are interested in a specific area. Um, Again, like your school, Science Park University, right? There are charter schools as well. Those are a little different. So they're also publicly funded and they don't cost anybody anything. However, they run independently, so they don't have to do a lot of the things public schools do, like state testing, for instance. They don't have to follow any type of state curriculum. They kind of march to the beat on their own drum. So examples of those are North Star Academy and KIPP Newark. So it's really a double-edged sword with charters because it can go really well or it can go really badly. And so a frustration, and Wendy, you could jump in on this if you want to as well. Like a frustration I think a lot of people have when things don't go well in a charter school is those were public funds used that could have been used in the public school system and it didn't go well and now maybe it closed down. So that has happened in different communities, right? And then there are online schools, which are fully virtual, right? So again, parents have the option to enroll their student there if they feel like they would thrive there over any of these other settings. Any questions about any of these, y'all? Okay. Oh, I saw something in the chat. No questions. Thank you, JD Moore. So here's a little chart, or rather two little charts side by side on charter school enrollment. So there are exactly 8,150 charter schools in the United States. There are 3.8 million students, and 7.6% of the student populace in 2022 or 2023 attended a charter school. It seems like these numbers are growing. We're not too sure why. And then if you look directly next to it, right, we see the percentage breakdown of how many students are enrolled in what kind of a setting from the Pew Research Center there. So I think it says 83% are enrolled in a public school. I can't see. Here we go. 7% in charter schools and 10% in private schools, right? So just to give you an idea of what the US education system breakdown looks like in terms of numbers, and to give you an idea of what charter school data would look like. So my people, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and in your notes, those notes you put together a little bit earlier, respond to this. Take a couple minutes, and if you could design your own school from scratch, what would it look like? Think about whether it would be traditional, would it be project-based online, or would it be something completely new? I wrote 30 seconds at the bottom. I know that's me being ambitious. Let's take about 2 or 3 minutes, okay? Just jot down your thoughts. If you were creating your own school, what would it look like and why? Go ahead, take two,
We
three
don't,
minutes.
yeah, we
Yep.
don't really have these schools in the US, but there are like forest schools where people learn how to like survive, and most of the learning happens in like the nature and environment. So like that's like a different way of thinking about school. Or I'm just spitting out ideas here, working in actual industry, right? So your school takes place in the business sector, and then you learn all these skills and you're ready to go once you graduate. So just like we're just think about what it could look like. Maybe you just like the way your school is, and you're okay with that. That's the one that you prefer, a magnet school. But just like maybe you would like a nature school, whatever you would like.
And there is also no wrong answer to this. We're just sharing our thoughts out loud, y'all. We're not reporting this to anybody. Like we are just talking, right? So go ahead, be honest in your response. Take 2 minutes, then we'll come back. Then I'm going to ask everybody to share, okay? Actually, let's do this, y'all. Once you are done with your response, you can even drop it in the chat. You can speak to it if you want to, but you can feel free to just drop what you're writing in the chat as well.
Yeah, if you feel comfortable, if you want to share, drop in the chat. At least one person could hopefully share, and then we'll move on.
Okay, so we got something from Michelle. My school will be a magnet school that specializes in engineering, specifically computer engineering. That's a really cool thought. I don't think I've ever heard of something like that existing, at least not in Jersey, right? So I think that's a really
Mhm.
cool thought.
you probably would just be able to get a job afterwards. You you didn't even
100%.
go to college.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I don't remember how to pronounce your name. Is it Alani?
Iolani? Aolani?
Iolani?
It's Alani.
Alani.
Alani. Okay. Alani said that your school would be a magnet school that would focus on architecture and art. Also really cool. I'm really getting a sense of your different interests here, which I really appreciate. So thank y'all for sharing. Okay. All right, my people. So I'm going to move forward. Again, keep this in your notes. We may come back to it. We may have more of a conversation about this kind of thing later, but keep it in your notes, okay? So there are a few aspects to schooling that make it really human, right? So one of those things is called social and emotional learning. There's been a big push for it since I started teaching. And like I said, that was about 10 years ago, 2015-ish, more or less, right? So social and emotional learning is the process of gaining skills to understand emotions, be able to set goals for yourself, manage empathy, and build relationships. So if we look at this little chart right here that I have on the my right-hand side, social emotional learning is at the center. And then these are skills that it comes with, right? Self-awareness, social awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision making, and self-management. And then we see it branching out. So these skills now move into your classroom. Then they move into your whole schools. Then they'll move into your home, to your families, to your caregivers, and then they move into your communities. So it really is a way to ensure that our students are becoming good people generally, right? Understanding people. An example that I thought of, and again, I'm an ELA teacher, so my mind always goes back to literature. When I ask my students to journal about personal feelings, or when we're talking about characters in a text and I ask them to complete like an empathy-based character analysis activity, that is something that is considered social emotional learning. Now, alongside that, there is something called trauma-informed practice. So these are strategies that really help us understand and respond to a traumatic experience's impact on a student in educational settings, right? Because whereas this maybe happened to them, whatever it is, right? Maybe happened to them at home or on the street or whatever, right? We want to create a safe space for them while they're within the school building, and we want to make sure that they are always safe. So an example of trauma-informed practice, TIP is the acronym we use for it, would be building trusting relationships, not only with your students, as a teacher, I'm speaking, right, as my students, but also getting to know their families, being involved in the community and knowing what resources are available to them. It's that very big, like it takes a village mindset. It really holds true, right? We want to make sure folks are safe, they're growing up to be good people, and they're understanding the folks around them and leading with empathy really as they move. Does that make sense, y'all? Okay. So let's take another quick minute and in your notes, please respond to the following three questions. Think about how far you remember social and emotional learning in your learning experience. Think about whether you ever learned it directly. Um, and think about how can understanding emotions and trauma really help create better learning environments. So go ahead, let's take a few minutes, just respond to these, okay?
I
And
do feel like, yeah, just sorry to add that in elementary school, these were taught a lot. But you might have not been taught this. Maybe you have. If you didn't, just say you haven't. But these were taught in elementary school as well as middle school and hopefully in high school.
okay. And then similarly, y'all, if you would like to share, you can drop it in the chat, no problem. But let's take a couple minutes and respond to these three questions. Make sure they are in your notes, y'all.
Anybody want to share? Hopefully one person can share, at least one person.
Yeah, we would really like to hear your thoughts on this. So me, especially being a teacher, I would like to know how much more I should cover on it or not. Freshman,
Oh, Alani, freshman year.
interesting. Wendy, question for you actually. When you taught, because you were fifth and sixth grade in Miami,
First, second, and fourth. Yeah, we would teach like character development, right? How, you got to be a good person. You have to like learn share.
really cool. JD Mad responded, I remember days in elementary school that were dedicated to SEL, but they weren't explicitly called that. I only started hearing of the term SEL in high school. Really interesting.
Yeah, I didn't call it SEL when I did it in elementary school too, right? But we were teaching that.
I wonder when the term was coined, right? I feel like this could be one of those concepts that had been around, but there was no name for it yet, right?
Yeah, I think that it's just become a popular term now. That's what people use, the umbrella, but you could still do things if you without calling it that. If you're still doing, the doing is the important part.
Yeah, for sure. All right, my people. So for the sake of time, I'm going to move on. Again, make sure these responses are in your notes. Again, we might come back and circle back to them from time to time. Very important stuff we're covering here. So, my people, very popular debate, and we're going to move into the debate piece of it later. I just want to make sure we understand terminology right now. But school choice and school vouchers are terms you may be hearing more and more, specifically these last few months. So, school choice is a very broad term that allows parents and students to select education outside of traditional public schools. So it could be like magnet schools, it could be like charter schools, and these are all publicly funded. But also private schools are an option. Online schools are an option. So essentially you get to pick. So just like the name says, choice, you choose, right? However, there has been a lot of talk recently about school vouchers. So these are state-funded scholarships for parents to choose and pay tuition for private schools. Eligibility for these scholarships, think of it like a coupon, right, y'all? So eligibility for the scholarships are often toward like the criteria. It's obviously targeted at low-income families, students with special needs, students attending failing public schools, right? I say that in quotations because there's a lot of, yeah, we'll talk about that, right? There's a lot to that.
Can I just add one thing? Like the
Of course.
coupon version is because sometimes at the private school, you're going to get a discount, but you're not going to get everything covered. So you take your money from your public school to the private school, but it's a coupon because it's the private schools are usually much more expensive. But keep going.
Right. No, exactly. Thank you, Wendy. So it's allowing these public education funds to follow a child, right? It's like saying, let's pull this 8,000, let's say just ballpark number, away from the federal funding that we give public schools to give it to this parent that wants to put their kid in private school. But to Wendy's point, that 8,000 is not going to cover tuition. That tuition might be $16,000, right? Now, let's say some family has two kids, wants to put both their kids in the same school, right? That's not payable. That's still $16,000 left to pay, even with those coupons or vouchers, right? So now the tricky part is, they target specific populations, like I just said, but private schools are not required to provide certain things like special education services. They don't have to follow the same accountability measures that public schools do. They don't have to take standardized tests. So, my people, I want to give you a chance to, now that you know what vouchers are, now that you know what school choice is, now that you know this issue with private schools, right? Reflect in your notes. So, think about whether or not public money in the form of a coupon or voucher should be used for private school tuition. Think about why or why not. Again, there is no wrong answers here, my people. You decide, think about it. And if you're comfortable sharing, drop in the chat too.
I just want to add, also recently in Arizona, and I forget which other state, the money can just go straight to the parents and the parents can homeschool the kids. So if you have four kids and they're giving you $8,000 and you're giving the parents directly 8 times 4, which is $32,000, and they get that. But the parents educate the students. And people have found that problematic because now that money's not going to public schools and parents aren't trained to be teachers. They may or may not have an education, and they're going to teach the students what they think versus teaching them a whole broader curriculum. But that is happening right now, where many places are giving just the money to the parents, right? So you can take it to a private school or you could just keep it and quote unquote teach your kids what you think. So
That is wow. And that you said Arizona, where else, Wendy?
I
Texas?
forgot which other places. No, maybe Texas, but I know Arizona is like the big one where people are really pushing back because then you can have lots of kids and each you keep getting more and more money the more kids you have, right?
I didn't even think about that. Interesting. Wow. All right, my people. So let's go ahead and take about another minute or so. And like I said, if you're comfortable, just drop it in the chat. If not, then that's okay. Just keep it in your notes and know that we'll circle back to it at some point.
Holy moly, I just looked it up online. It is Arizona, as I said. Also, Arkansas, Florida, Indiana, Iowa, Ohio, Oklahoma, and West Virginia have all expanded their programs in the last like couple of years. That's just a
That's
lot.
a lot. That is a lot. But I am also surprised that Texas is not on that list. That was my first guess.
Yeah, I don't remember hearing about Texas, so.
All right, my people. For the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and just move on. But keep this thought in your back of your mind that, like I said, keep it in your notes. Here we go. So, my people, arguments against school vouchers are as follows, right? So, it has this obvious financial impact on public schools. They take away money from public school systems, and then there are still the same bills to pay from the school system, even when fewer students attend. There is a lack of accountability. How do we know that the private schools are actually taking care of the children the way they claim? Who do they report to, right? That's the real big thing, right? And like we said before, they don't have to take everybody, which moves into our next point about increased segregation. They pick who they want. They also don't have to take special needs kids. They don't have to take students that immigrated here, I don't know, recently or even within 10 years. They can really make this decision, which leads to much potential for discrimination, right? Um, and so there are concerns about using public funds for things like religious schools, which many private schools are affiliated to some kind of a faith-based schooling. So some people have, because separation of church and state, it's a whole other concept, right? But some people have very big issues with that, the constitutional concerns it comes from. And so these vouchers may only benefit the wealthy. So families, like we said earlier, that are able to afford this kind of thing because this coupon is not the full price tag of the tuition, right? So who mostly sends their kids to private school? Those who have access to and are able to. Does that make sense, y'all? Okay. If you have any questions, again, drop them in the chat. Okay. Thank you, JD Mud. So now I want to move into this topic about measuring student success. So we talked about different schools. We talked about family choice. We talked about some issues with potential choice and also voucher systems. But I want to talk about accountability as the state and policymakers see it. So how do we know if these schools are working? How do we measure student learning and hold schools accountable? So we're going to walk into standardized testing. This is probably one of the most heated debates in education. And honestly, it's been since I was in school, and Wendy, probably since you were in school too. Both of us, we went through this too, right? So but actually, I'm very curious. I'm going to ask a question and you could drop your responses in the chat. How do y'all feel about standardized testing? You could give me a word, you could give me a phrase. What do you think? How do y'all feel about standardized testing? What word comes to mind when you hear the NJGPA is next week or the NJSLA? Okay. Unnecessary. JD might said a bit conflicted. I see unnecessary from Alani as well. Okay. Yeah, I don't love it either. To be honest, as a teacher, I don't love it. But a lot of times, and this is one of my bigger frustrations with it, a lot of NJ high schools lose about a month of instructional time because of testing, right? And that's a lot of time considering we only have 10 months in school. And even then, there's a lot of interruption. There are things like assemblies, there are things like drills we have to do. There are days off throughout the year, right? So when you think about it, we're taking the NJSLA. Now, this year, we had to take the NJSLA adaptive assessment, right? Very different. The NJGPA, you guys all took junior year. And then there's the access test specifically for multilingual learners, so folks that were in ESL. Um, so I think it is a lot. I do think so. But like JD Maj said, there is a lot of conflict to it, and some people are very much for them, right? So policymakers and the public are, and by the public, I mean some of the public, right? But policymakers argue that it ensures accountability. So that this is how we can measure student achievement. This ensures transparency to make sure that some communities are scoring as well as others. They're all learning the same thing. A lot of this test data helps policymakers evaluate education systems, and how many resources they need, how much funding they need, allocation, etc. And then a lot of folks will argue that this is a way to compare performance on a wider scale. So it allows comparisons from district to district, from state to state. So how is New Jersey doing in comparison to Arkansas doing? So they say that this is really used to identify strengths and weaknesses in a system. Now, we talked about what our thoughts were on state assessment. However, it does have an impact on so much more, right? So a lot of times there is this concept of teaching to the test because a lot of teachers feel as though these tests, the scores are a reflection on them, right? So, and I will speak to that. Like, that's me talking about my personal experience. So there is this focus on test taking strategies and limited topics, right? Which really limits instructional time even further. Overemphasis on memorization. So this multiple choice format encourages just know how to take the test versus let's really understand what we're doing here, or let's really value this that we're learning or that we're going through. Um, and these tests also don't measure, if you see my little note at the bottom there, they don't measure creativity, critical thinking, or problem solving. And these are really skills that you'll use in the real world, which is in some way what we're doing here, right? We are collaborating, we are thinking, we are talking. Um, Impact on students, right? Tests are anxiety inducing, whether that's a small test for school or whether that's a standardized assessment. And they are dehumanizing in some way as well, my people. So it reduces your abilities to this one single score that you're attached to after you finish it. And lastly, impact on equity. So affluent students usually have greater access to like these test prep resources. So a lot of times we see higher scores maybe there because of that, right? There was access to more resources to prepare for this and to make sure we pass, right? And then there's also cultural bias. So something very interesting, and I don't know that, like, I don't know if you guys know this. So the high school I work in right now has a very large multilingual population. So a lot of immigrant students, they still have to take the same test. There's no modification on it for them. It's all in English. They could have gotten here yesterday. They have to take that NJGBA. So imagine that, right? Just coming here from, like, my family's from Cuba, right? Let's say I got here from Cuba yesterday. I have to sit through this test, just like any other person that was born here and has been through the American school system has to take, which is not fair, right? It's not fair. It's not equitable. So my people, I'm going to move into AI now. Um, so we talked about measures of accountability, something like testing, but education also keeps evolving. And so AI is something that's also very conflicting, right? So I'm going to move into some info about that, and then very soon I'm going to ask you to reflect in your notes as well. So, my people, the promise of AI and the promise of this, newfound integration, is to adapt to student-specific needs, interests, strength. It's supposed to make learning more engaging. It's supposed to make it in some way, it's supposed to help even the playing field, right? Um, AI tools provide immediate feedback on assignments. They can give you practice questions. They can help students identify and correct errors quickly. We look at study support. It could generate study plans. It could create mnemonics. It could work through practice problems, and it could summarize complex text. So there is so much that it could do if used well. And accessibility, right? So there are text to speech abilities now. There is live captions. There is real-time transcription. It's supposed to really be used to make content accessible to students with disabilities and hearing impairments as well. So at the bottom, I have an example, which is Khan Academy's Khanmigo. That's supposed to serve as an AI teaching assistant. Do you guys have that in your district? Do you use that?
Why did Michael say yes and then Michelle and Michelle and Alani say no because I thought it was a yes from what the data people told me. So if you can expand on that.
Or yeah, please let us know. So we use Khan Academy, but I don't think we've used Canmigo. Okay. So Michael, have you used Canmigo? I wonder if it's something that may be certain. So you don't use it either, Michael. Okay, got you. But Khan Academy, yes. Okay. Okay. So this is essentially a way to personalize education, right? AI. So I want to go ahead and allow you some time to reflect, right? We all know what AI is. It's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. Let's take a look at these two questions at the top. What are your thoughts on AI in education? And like I said, there's no judgment here. You can be entirely honest. And how could AI personalized learning help students who struggle to adapt in traditional classrooms? So go ahead and respond to those. And lastly, there is one more question at the bottom. So write in your notes as well. AI can benefit students, but what are some challenges that come to your minds? And again, we are going to dive into these challenges in a little bit. So those first two bullet points and that last question at the bottom.
And you already answered that you don't use Kamigo. I
Yeah.
guess I need to go ask the district why they're telling me that people do use it.
I wonder, Wendy, if it's one of those things that there's access to, but perhaps
Mm,
folks maybe aren't, by folks, I mean educators aren't comfortable using it because they haven't been trained yet or don't
I'm
know
gonna
it's there,
I'm
like
gonna
all these
ask if
things.
our students here can use it then.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
That would be really cool. So my people, take a couple minutes and again, as per usual, feel free to drop your responses in the chat if you're comfortable. There is no judgment at all. Okay, so Alani says students could rely heavily on AI if they use it, making them less reliant on their own intelligence. Okay, definitely a
I have
challenge there.
seen that in
Me
my
too.
students in college. It makes me very upset because you go to college to learn and then they're using AI to serve as their brain. And I'm like, no, no, no. The point is you're paying so that you can improve your brain and think for yourself, right? You can use AI if you need like support, but not to think for you.
I have really mixed feelings about it too. I like, some people would argue in the English classroom, use it to create an outline for what you're writing. And I don't know that I always agree with that either, because I feel like when I outline is when I'm doing the most thinking. And so then like, I don't know.
I see what you're saying because then you're boxed into what AI thinks is the outline. And if you had just thought about it, you might have thought outside of the AI data, right?
Yeah.
And now you're
Yep.
not going to think that because AI told you this is the outline. So now you're going to follow that outline.
Right. So I think if anything, and I've tried this, I don't know, I still don't even know how I feel about it. I've had my students write their own outline, then put it into AI and see if it adds anything. I've tried that and some love it, maybe some are deterred by it.
I do the same thing actually. I do it myself first and then I ask and then if I sometimes like you're crazy, you're saying dumb stuff. So no.
All right. So for the sake of time, I'm going to move forward. Again, this is a very hot topic. Oh, wait, JD Marr gave us a response. Like I said before about standardized testing, I'm conflicted on it. I believe AI has become something students are so reliant on now. They don't even want to learn manually. And a lot of the times, AI gives them wrong info. Yes, very true. So AI gives you these things called hallucinations. In events where it doesn't know the answer, it'll make them up. And Wendy, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, and so I always have my students when they use AI to tell AI where they got the information from and then go to the source because as Jadamar just said, it does give them wrong information. So you need to check the sources and not just believe it. But that requires work, right? So at that point, you're doing as much work as if you've done it yourself. So
Right. Sometimes it's not as helpful and it could definitely take us even longer. All right, my people. So moving on, we're going to shift gears. So this is the part where we're going to talk about challenges a little bit. And lucky for us, I believe we get to stay on the topic of AI as we move forward, right? So a lot of you have mentioned this over-reliance problem for sure. So humans now frequently accept AI recommendations even when it's incorrect, and this could lead to a lot of errors, right? Then there's a complexity problem. When people don't need, I'm sorry, when tasks are easy, let's say 2 plus 2, right? People don't need AI help. However, people may still feel the need to use it now, right? And when tasks are hard, AI explanations can give you, to Wendy's point, as much of a complex response and, needing revision as just maybe doing it manually. You'd probably get there quicker if you did it manually. And then to expand on the concept, right? So there are all these issues about blurred lines and academic integrity, right? So 30% of students now admit to using AI to completing assignments, which again, mixed feelings all around, right? Privacy and data security. We don't really know what's happening to what we're putting into it. How do we know where it's going? How do we know they're not going to get hacked? Loss of human connection. So AI cannot replace empathy, right? So the thought of having an actual teacher in front of you versus just, I also have very mixed feelings of online school. But versus just kind of learning yourself online. Digital divide and equity gaps. So similar to what we spoke about a little bit earlier, some folks may have unequal access to AI. Are these like premium services you could pay for versus not? Algorithm bias. AI systems are trained on biased data. So, and then cognitive developmental concerns. So
And we're
we,
going to talk, sorry, just really quick, we're going to talk a lot about the data that AI is trained on, right? Because it's trained on where we live, and the world that we live in is not neutral, it's biased. So then it just replicates the world that we live in. So if we want to change the world that we live in, then that's a problem. But keep going.
yeah, no problem. So cognitive developmental concerns. So it's been here, however, it's still very new, and we don't know the long-term effects that it'll have, right? So there is a generation now that's growing up that will never know a world without AI, which is so interesting to me, but we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know the long-term effects it's going to have on them as they go through school, move through college, maybe go to grad school, maybe get PhDs. I have all these questions, right? Um, so moving forward, yo, who makes this happen, right? So we've talked about learning systems, we talked about testing, we talked about AI and equity and funding a little bit, right? Um, but we also have teachers, right? So let's talk about some of the things that they're dealing with. Before I move on, let's go ahead and in our notes, just write about one teacher and get a little reflective. And you don't have to share this one if you don't want to, or you could if you want to. Same thing in the chat. Think about who this teacher was. Think about what they did to that mattered to you, and think about how it impacted you. Okay? So go ahead and just jot down a little bit, have some memories of this teacher, jot down a little bit about them. No, you don't have to. You could if you want to, you don't have to at all. Just reflect on them, think about why they were important, what they did, and how you remember them. That is beautiful, Wendy. Second grade, all the way post PhD, you still go back. That's awesome. Yeah. I was part of a group in high school called Tomorrow's Teachers. I guess it was like my training for this. And now I teach the class, but I always remember that teacher, Mrs. Alfonso, because I feel like in some way she paved the way for my own future. So that's really cool. So thank you for sharing that, Wendy. All right, y'all. Eighth grade ELA teacher always made me feel welcome. That's beautiful. And I love to hear that. ELA all the way. Mr. A, and he was an English teacher in the eighth grade, supported me through a tough time in my life and helped me a lot when writing. He showed us not to use dead words such as bad, okay, which I carried with me. That's powerful. That is powerful. Okay, y'all. I'm going to move forward. Again, if you want to share, feel free to drop it in there. If not, just keep it in your notes. So I'm glad to hear all these uplifting stories about teacher impact. Um, because there is also such thing upon us like a teacher shortage. This exists in New Jersey. This exists across the country, really. And it is really hard and meaningful work. And I know I'm biased in saying that because of what I currently do, but there are causes to this teacher burnout. And so what we've heard via research is insufficient pay, lack of respect, student discipline challenges was cited as the primary cause. Teaching can be considered very political in some ways. So politicians and non-educators are making education decisions that really rain down on a district and a teacher's freedom. A lot of district initiatives. And then this is an NJ specific challenge, but I'm sure it exists in other parts of the country as well. There is a very high cost of living relative to what a teacher salary makes, or a teacher gets as a salary, excuse me. So it's hard to afford an apartment to live in when this is your salary in this specific space. So 78% of teachers through this one study have thought about quitting since the pandemic, right? And this was a study done on 500 public school teachers. So let that sink in. 78 is a big number, right? It's over three-fourths. It's not half, it's more than half by far. 10% of New Jersey teachers leave annually, which doesn't sound like much, right? 10%, we see it, right? But 10% is 10%, right? But then nearly 50% leave within a decade. That's half of the staff, y'all. So there are 5,000 plus teaching vacancies across the state of New Jersey, or there was at the start of the school year in 2022 and 2023. And then over here, my last little box there were 148 teacher vacancies reported in 2025. So that's one vacancy per 10,000 students, right? So to give you an idea of the numbers, right? Because I also feel like there are these misconceptions of, they get summers off, whatever, like, and yes, we do, right? It's nice and it's a blessing and I'm grateful. However, there are definitely a lot of challenges that come with the job too. And I feel like people, especially people that are not in education, don't really always see that. Um, yeah, actually, Wendy, can you briefly talk about that? If you don't mind talking about your career as an educator and why you chose to be a professor now.
Yeah, so I started my career when I finished college. I actually majored in international relations because I wanted to be an ambassador for the United Nations or for the government. But then I got into education because I learned about all these things that you guys are learning about. So I was like, oh, maybe I want to look at education because I don't think I got the education that I think I deserved. And everyone's getting a different type of education, and that this isn't fair. So I went into education and I was a first grade, second grade, and fourth grade teacher. It was really, really hard. It's the hardest job I've ever had. I've had a lot of jobs, but it was also the most rewarding job that I've ever had. And there's no other job where you get instant rewards. Like when your students learn something, like that feels really good. And most jobs you wait years or for that gratification. And now I went and I did lots of other things. Like I worked with civil rights organizations, but I still teach, right? So now I'm a professor. So in many ways, I'm still back to where I started. Now I'm teaching different subjects, not how to read, but now I'm teaching how to read data and how to understand education. So I'm back in education. And I asked in chat if anyone else wants to be a teacher. And Marilyn said she's majoring in elementary education. She wants to be an elementary school teacher.
So y'all, if you have an interest in education, you have a resource in each of the three of us here. Okay. And so then Wendy, real quick, I'm so sorry to call on you again. Can you talk about the work you did in between and how that was connected to education? So in between your time as a K-12 teacher to now professor? So the National Urban League, like those were
Yeah, so we still were fighting for social justice and all of these. Like I worked as a researcher and I worked at giving away money to help education. So I was helping give away money from rich people was a very weird job. Helping give rich people's money to education causes. And then at the National Urban League, it's like, how do you support after school programs? At urban leagues, like Newark has an urban league, Essex County has an urban league. How do you support them so that they can help students? Because you want to help them not just in school, but out of school. It's always been around social justice and how we can help people, but you don't not necessarily teaching. Now I'm teaching about those things.
Okay, really cool. See, so Wendy was also like Robin Hood at some point, making the world more equitable. So moving forward, y'all, on this topic of teachers, right? Here we go. Um, so teaching during the pandemic was obviously not easy. And that's kind of how I want to transition here. There was a lot of learning loss that we saw post-COVID. So the average American student remains half a grade level behind from pre-pandemic, so before 2020, in both reading and math, and that's national, right? In math, students have made up 1/3 of what they lost. However, it's still not what it was, right? Um, those students have made up 1/4 of what they lost in reading. So I took these two charts off of the Harvard Education Center at Opportunity. I cited it at the bottom, but this is Newark Public Schools specifically. So if we take a look at these line graphs, look at the math performance, right? So we see pre-COVID from 2009 on, and then we see this drastic dip from 2019 all the way up to 2021. And now it seems like we've plateaued a little bit. So we've made it up a little bit, a very slight bit, but we're working. There is progress there, not as much as it has to be, though. That's what we see in math at the very top. And then let's take a look at that reading graph at the bottom. So it was pretty steady. It was pretty steady. Then we went up significantly around 2017. Then we saw a slight decline. However, during those pandemic years, we see much more of a decline. And then now we are there at that very last bullet right there. So there was definitely a lot of learning lost, and we're trying to make up for it now, right? Actively. But the effects are still there as we see them. So this chart is a little bit different. So we see three arrows. We see where Newark Public School falls at the very start. We see where New Jersey falls averagely in the middle. And we see average among similar districts in New Jersey. So it lists some of those at the bottom. So things like Trenton Public Schools, Vineland Public Schools, New Brunswick School Districts, Atlantic City. So look where Newark compares to the state. So the left, the middle, right? That's where Newark falls in comparison to the state average. However, doing much better than its counterparts that are considered similar, right? Wendy, did you want to say anything about the graphs?
Yeah, well, not necessarily just about the graphs, but just like even right now we're teaching virtually and I'm pretty good about it because of COVID, but I don't prefer it. I prefer all the rest of our sessions will be in person. So I prefer in person because it's hard to learn virtually. It's hard to be present virtually for both people. And it's hard, if I say a joke, I don't know if you're responding to it, things like that, and that personal relationship that you build with students, it's hard to build virtually. You can do it, but I think it's really hard. So there was a lot of learning loss, and I'm sure that you guys have your own thoughts on. Some people really like it, so have your own thoughts of that.
Yeah,
Alani says she thinks it's better in person because yeah, teachers can adapt to your style. Yeah, so we all agree. I
yeah,
don't in
I think
this
so too.
maybe here in this small group we agree. Some people who are introverts, they really liked it and they excelled. But that for the majority of people, I think we like to be in person. And then here are the results. So these graphs are showing the results. So things went down and we're still just trying to catch up. By things, I mean reading and math skills went down.
Right. And then, we also now throw AI into the mix, which could be a benefit or not, like we talked about, right? So, to give you a sense of where we are, y'all, in terms of this COVID learning loss and how we're recovering from it. And so, my people, and then this is reading, right? So Newark Public School District compared to New Jersey, compared to average among, so we are doing significantly better, it looks like, by than the other similar districts in New Jersey, but look at the state average up there as well. So same kind of thing, but this one's reading based, and this is specific to Newark, grades 3 to 8. Another thing that happened during the pandemic, y'all, and I'm sure, maybe you've experienced some of this personally. Maybe you have a friend that did, somebody that did. things like depression and anxiety in students skyrocketed. More than half of students experienced distress levels high enough for it to be considered concerning. And students struggled with sadness, with frustration, with stress, more than we've ever seen before. So half of all, like, look at my little critical concern at the bottom, half of all mental health disorders develop before adulthood. So that's why this was specifically concerning during the pandemic. And then we ask ourselves why this may have happened. And the answers, some of them are here, right? Sudden isolation, schools just kind of closed overnight. And there are folks that look forward to seeing their friends at school, look forward to that, good morning from a teacher. But that wasn't there anymore, that connection. Uncertainty and fear, right? The stress of what's gonna happen, even just the whole like, am I gonna get sick? Am I gonna have a family member that gets sick like around this time, right? Um, Online learning stress. So you have to be really, as Wendy just pointed out, like you have to be very, very disciplined to be able to study online and to find the motivation to really focus and do what you need to do. And lastly, there was lost support systems. So there are students that really maybe rely on these schools to feed them every day. Maybe they look forward to a consultation with a social worker in the building. Maybe it's just safe, right? Maybe it's just like a nice place to be for them, and that was gone. So I don't think that the pandemic created these mental health issues, right? But it definitely either exposed them or made them worse. And now these are things we can pay closer attention to because we know about them. So let's take a look at these little graphs I got here, right? So the one on the left tells us about experience of persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness during the past, well, 2023 is when this was. So if we look at the total, there's about 40% in total. And again, this is high school students. If we look at by sex, so females tended to show a little bit more, 53% male, 28. And then if we break it down by race, you can see those numbers right there. American Indian, 45%. Asian 32%, Black 40%, Hispanic 42%, Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander 26, White 39, multiracial 41. And then it seems like the highest number we see there is the LGBTQ plus community that express these feelings of sadness and hopelessness, right? And then if we look at the chart right next to it, that little line graph, we can really see the past 10 years and what that looked like in terms of sadness and hopelessness based on race. So if you see a color on the side or at the very top, just follow that color and you'll see exactly what that percentage was and how it dipped and went up. Okay. Uh, Wendy, you're on mute. I don't know if you were. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry, no, it went up, but it's dipping, which is a good thing. But as Juan pointed out, LGBTQ, Native communities and Latino communities were, and women were really struggling. And it's dipping, it's good, but it's still higher than it should be.
For sure. For sure. And I think I may have, yeah, here we go. There was a reflection question here. So guys, go ahead and just jot down your response in your notes. So why do you think mental health challenges increased dramatically for students during and after the pandemic? So think about it. We've talked about some of it. You may have additional thoughts, put that down. And what kind of support do you think would make the biggest difference? So let's go ahead, take a moment, read over that question again and respond to it in your notes. And as per usual, if you're comfortable sharing, you could drop that in the chat for us, okay? Take a couple minutes and focus. People, I'm going to move on in about a minute or so. again, just respond. And then if you're comfortable sharing, you could drop your thoughts in the chat. Thank you all, by the way, for being such an engaging audience. I feel like you've really been locked in here and we're appreciative.
Yeah, Iolani says that she thinks mental health challenges have increased because of isolation. Even though we had forms of communication with friends, it was a lot different when you interact in person. Yeah, like virtual or text. We still are on our phones, even me.
Yeah, no, me too. I try to refrain from using it as much as I can. I
I'm
don't.
totally addicted.
No, me too. It's so convenient, right? Like you have a question, let me ask Google. Like it's like let me, it's hard not to be on it.
Yeah.
Um,
Michelle agrees that there was like an increase in isolation that was increased stress, and then we came back, and now we have all this work to do again. So then, like the shock of coming back, probably not super
I,
helpful.
I didn't even think about that, right? And then that's an adjustment all over again. It's like learning to show up to school again. Something else that's interesting. I remember I had, and this may just be a preference thing, but I had a number of students that kept wearing a mask for about 2 or 3 years, which is fine because it might be preference. But I remember coming back from the pandemic and the masks didn't come off for a while for some people. It's that. So I wonder if that was in some way connected to their mental health too, is what I'm saying. Okay. All right, my people. So I'm going to move on for the sake of time. Just bear with me for a little longer. We're almost done with the session, and I think I might be able to get through the whole presentation by the time we finish today. Okay. So, my people, I want to spend some time talking about equity. Who knows what the word equity means? Let's drop it in the chat if you have a response. What is equity? No wrong answers. Really, just take a guess if you don't know. What is equity? The amount of something? Not necessarily. You're close, but not necessarily, right? You're on mute, Wendy.
Yeah, that's the beginning of the definition. You're not, yeah.
Having the same opportunities to thrive as your neighbor. Okay. I think we're getting somewhere together, right? So, okay,
Yeah.
the beginning, the amount of something, having the same opportunities to thrive as your neighbor,
The
right?
amount could be opportunities. Yeah.
So does anybody have anything to add to that? So the thought and the concept of equity is to level out the playing field, is to be able to, yes, provide a certain amount of resources, especially when we're talking about education. I'm using the word resources to be able to make this playing field a little more opportunistic for everybody, not just for one group, not just for another. So there is a big gap in educational equity, specifically in our state. I'm going to talk about both a little bit nationally, then our state. So there is a such thing called Title I funding. And Title I funding is federal programming providing financial assistance to schools with high percentage of low-income students to ensure everybody has an equal opportunity there. And so this is usually determined by the amount of students that receive free or reduced lunch in that school district here. So essentially, this money is meant to be used for these districts to be able to provide these resources to level out the playing field a little more, right? Because if you take a look at my findings at the bottom, family income is a strong predictor of school success. And these achievement gaps that we see start even before kindergarten, right? So imagine that before 5 years old, before ever setting foot in a school, because some folks don't start till kindergarten, there's already an achievement gap there. And then, so if you take a look at my little New Jersey statistic in the box, right, there are 540,000 plus students that receive Title I support in schools. So we have to take care of that. We should protect it, right? Um, let's take a look at these achievement gaps by race, right? So I pulled this chart from the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And this is a 12th grade reading. Um, chart. So we're looking at the factors like the difference between white and black at that very top line. So that is around close to 32 points, right? A difference in reading level for a 12th grade
That's
between.
a lot of points, right? Of the difference between white students and black students, right? And then they adjusted it. Yeah, they adjusted it. Like, let's say if we have the same income. So they used some statistical analysis to adjust it. The gap is still 18 points. So if you're a rich black person and you're a rich white person, you still have a gap of 18. Or if you're a rich or a low income white person and a low income black person, you still have a gap of 18. But overall, it's a gap of 31 if you don't look at it in terms of income. I don't know if that makes sense. Juan, I don't know if you want to, I was trying
Yeah.
to interpret.
No, I think it made sense, Wendy. That was actually a great explanation, actually. But yeah, so that's from white to black, right? That was big. And then white to Hispanic, we still see
Big.
21 point gap, which is still pretty big, right? And then Asian to white, we see close to five, like 4.39. That's the difference.
Asian students do better, I think, than white students.
I think so
Um,
too.
so when you adjust, when the adjusted Asian students do better without adjusting, white students do better. So the gaps there are sometimes the other way.
Yeah. So these achievement gaps really exist across racial and ethnic groups, and it's very clear. It's clear as day. However, one thing I want to make clear, this is not about student ability and it's not about intelligence, right? It's reflective of unequal access to resources and different supports, right? So that's one thing I want to make clear. It's not an intelligence thing. It's an equity thing, right? Now we know the definition to the word. It's an equity thing. So then when we take a look at what drives equity, right? Funding. So money, school funding. And this is something that I learned when I got to college. I didn't really know how school funding worked, but now I do because I'm a teacher and I study education, right? Um, they come from local property taxes mostly. So these uppity communities, high taxes. Yeah, Wendy, go ahead.
Yeah, so if you have a big house, you're going to pay more taxes, right? So if you live in a neighborhood with mansions, they're going to pay more taxes. And the towns might even have higher tax rates. So then they're just going to pay more and more. So those schools get more money. Versus if you live in Newark, where the houses are not mansions, and the property taxes are lower, then the schools get less money. So that's how it works for the entire country, which is a
Right.
problem too, but yeah.
Yeah. And so then when we think about racial inequality, and that could be, or sorry, racial inequity, excuse me, that could be tied to the taxes and community as well. Districts with the most students of color receive 16% less state and local revenue than districts with fewer students of color. So that's 2,700 less per student, right? In a district with 5,000 students, 13.5 million in missing resources, right? Districts with most English learners receive 14% less than districts with fewer English learners, which is 2,200 less per student for students with higher needs. And high poverty districts receive 5% less, which is about 800 per student than low poverty districts.
That means richer schools get more money on average. So if
Mhm.
you're poor, you get less money on average.
Any questions on that stuff, guys? I know that's a little bit, different for, I don't know that you guys have ever heard those numbers for you. But any questions on like funding or equity? Okay. All right, I'm going to move on. Like I said, y'all, bear with me. You guys are doing great, and we only have a little more left. So if we take a look at school system spending per pupil by region, we can see that the Northeast, where we live, New York, Vermont, New Jersey, specifically New Jersey, we spend most on our pupils, right? We really value education here.
Pupils
Uh,
is per person, so per student. Just
right.
be.
In comparison to somebody that lives, let's say, in the South, right? Like if you take a look at Oklahoma versus New Jersey, so New Jersey, 26,280, Oklahoma, you see 11,155. So, whereas regionally we are doing well, there is still a lot of work to be done in terms of equity because it's still not an equitable playing field. But to give you a sense, these are the numbers. Somebody in the Midwest, like South Dakota, 12,005. And again, let's compare it to New Jersey or New York. 26,000 to 30,000.
And then I just want to add that the best schools in the United States are in the Northeast, the best public schools, and they are where you have the most money, right? I went to school in California. You can see there it's 18,000. California is not cheap. And the fact that in New Jersey you get almost 8,000, more than $8,000 more per person is huge because California is expensive. New Jersey is also expensive, but we're getting $8,000 less. So if you went to school where I went to school, we got so much less money. I just want putting that all into perspective.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Wendy. Another challenge we've seen, y'all, and this maybe ties into both equity and the COVID learning loss. We've seen what's called chronic absenteeism, so meaning missing 10% more of school days per academic year. So that's about 18 days per year. And so here are some numbers, right? We're looking at high poverty, so lower income. Pre-pandemic, 25% of high poverty schools had chronic extreme absenteeism. But post-pandemic, that rose to 69%. You see that drastic change in those numbers from 25 to 69. And then here we could take a look at this little chart as well. Same thing. It's Newark School District, grades 3 to 8. So we can see that it was a little high at the start, but then it's dipped significantly. And so the reason why there is not a solid line or much within is because school was virtual, where you see those little dots. So I feel like maybe that wasn't what's the word I'm looking for? That's not something that was taken account of too much because school was virtual, right? So how could you tell if you're there or not? But before it was high, we've made some progress, but it still remains high.
Yeah, we want this to be low, right? We don't want people to be absent. So high is not good. We want it low.
Right. And so if we take a look at these numbers per academic year, hold on, let me just go ahead and move. Here we go. So this is US chronic absenteeism by year, my people, right? As you can see, when it was highest was in 2022 with 28.5%. So it has dipped, but in 2017 it was only 13.4%, and now in 2024 it remains to be 23.5%. So this is still an ongoing issue. We are still battling it. It is quite the challenge, y'all. So how do students learn when they're not coming to school, right? So it's another thing we're fighting and we're trying to actively get down to and find out the root cause of so we can help make it better. Okay. And then if we take a look at, and there's a reflection question attached to this, y'all. So as you look at this, think about what factors might contribute to this. I got this chart, or I created this chart based on numbers from the same source. Um, Take a look at race, right? So Asian students are the least chronic absent, then white students, and Hispanic and Black students are absent the most chronically. Why do we think? Think about what factors might be contributing to this. Go ahead and take a minute, and if you're comfortable, please drop your responses in the chat.
And I don't know if you remember the gaps we were talking about before, but Asian and white students had the lowest gaps, which is a good thing, right? They're learning the most. And Latino and Black students have the biggest gaps. Um, One of the reasons is because they're not going to school, but why are they not going to school is really, you don't want
Big.
to blame it on them. Why is it? There's a lot of reasons. Family issues, could be mental health, could be regular like medical health.
Yeah, for
A
sure.
disengagement with the school because the teachers are just mean to you and don't believe in you. So why are you going to go to school? There's a lot of different reasons. And people are studying this. I'm actually studying it from the health perspective right now.
Which is really awesome. That's really cool, Wendy. And then peer pressure or being influenced,
If
learning
if
environment.
it's not cool to go to school, then maybe you just don't care.
Michael, I'm curious if you wouldn't mind, like, what do you mean by learning environment? You could type it in the chat or you could unmute. I'm just curious, what do you mean by that? All right, Michael, if you think of like if you want to explain that a little further, I'll look back at it later. But for the sake of time, I don't want to keep you guys for too long. I'm going to keep moving, okay? But Michael, I'm very curious to know what you meant by learning environment. So type that in there when you can. Uh, oh, how students are treated in school. Oh, well, that would make sense. All right, my people. So the last thing I have to cover, and I might take you over 11 by just a couple minutes, there have been a lot of changes to the federal government since Trump's presidency. And these proposed changes were to dismantle the Department of Education entirely, to cut federal funding to schools, to create this national voucher program. We talked about the coupon, right? That eliminate DEI programs, so diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and threaten to hold Title I funds if people don't adhere by this, right? 90% of students attend public school. 95% of students with disabilities attend public schools. 60% plus of schools are Title I eligible, meaning lower income, and nearly 7 million students use Pell Grants. So a Pell Grant is money that you get to go to college. It's not money you have to pay back.
I got a Pell Grant.
I also got one. So if you fall under a certain financial threshold, a Pell Grant is when the government says
Yeah.
we
Yeah,
want to
JMR,
use.
it's like FAFSA. So fat it's part of your FAFSA package.
Mhm.
So it'd be
Yep.
less if you don't if there's no Pell Grants.
Right. So these are some of the changes that he's proposed since he has been in presidency, which would affect education significantly and have affected education significantly, right? So, for instance, all OSER staff was fired, and this is the office that oversees special education funding, which is about 15 billion. And then there are 7.5 million children with disabilities. So we don't have staff there anymore. Federal laws were required this office to exist, but and so some of these cuts may have even been illegal. But that's something that's in progress right now, right? There are parents calling out for help now, but they're not getting any answer. There is no oversight to ensure that states comply with IDEA. Do you want to talk about any of those, Wendy?
No, just overall, we'll be talking more about this, but the big problem is that special education and civil rights are directed by the federal government. So if New Jersey has a lot of special education students, then it will give the federal government will give money to New Jersey to serve them. And now there's no oversight, so there's no funding. We don't know if we're serving those students. So it's very problematic.
Yeah. And so then if we're looking at this real world impact, right? So some of the things we've already seen as of March 2025, Columbia University received a $400 million cut. There have been over 300 student visas revoked. So folks that were here going to school, done, gone, right? 43,600 students lost TRIO program resources, and TRIO programs are programs to bridge equity differences in universities.
For first
So,
generation students and low income students. So they're
correct.
really helpful when you go to college and you join them. They'll help you get internships, they'll help you with book scholarships, they'll give you a mentor, things like that.
Right. So, and then in New Jersey, we still have a ton, and Wendy and I can talk about that and help you with that if you have questions. But close to 44,000 students lost these resources. California is at risk to lose $2.4 billion in Title I funding, 1.3 billion in special ed, and 250 million in after school programs.
We'll see the impact of these later on. So I'm going to put that as a to do. So put that in your notes. I just put in the chat to do between now and next time we meet because we don't have time. Pick one of these and tell me why it matters most to you. And then also talk about what was most interesting or surprising to you from this presentation. So make sure to do that in the notes after we end. You can just do it. It could take you 10 minutes. It doesn't need to take you a long time. Just reflect on that. And then I'm going to ask you again when we meet on 11/21. So that is the next meeting. It will be at your high school. It will be at 3:30. I think it will be in room 111. Before we leave, I sent everybody a $25 gift card. Check your email, check your spam, and let me know right now if you received it. You got that gift card because you finished the survey. So please check that right now. So I sent everybody, it should have been around like 10:20. Jadamar received it. Michelle, does that mean you received it? I know you're grateful, but I'm just like, did you? Yeah. You can use You can use the gift card like on anything, like online that you buy. If it's more than $25, I don't think it takes it. So you have to buy something that's $25 or less. So buy something, yeah. So because I think somebody tried to use it once for $30 and they wanted to pay the $5 extra, but Amazon was being really annoying. So I don't know if that's how it works, but it's $25 Visa. You can use it anywhere that you buy online. It's just like a Visa gift card. Michael,
Mike,
did you receive it?
he did get it. He direct messaged me.
Oh, okay. Okay. So yeah, I just want to make sure you received it. You can use it now. And I will be following up with Michael and Wineska because they're over 18 about special forms for them. But I'll see you all on 11/21. And hopefully the people who missed it can watch this recording and take the survey. Thank you, everybody, and have a really good rest of your weekend. And then you get Tuesday off again. What is going on? I was like,
Yeah, thank you guys. You guys were great. I appreciate you.